You think having no friends means something is wrong with you. But what if the loneliest people are actually the most psychologically complex humans alive? Stay with me, because what I'm about to share will completely change how you see people who walk through life alone. If this hits close to home, drop a alone in the comments right now. There is a person you probably know. Maybe it is someone at work. Maybe it is a neighbor. Maybe it is the quiet one in class who always eats lunch by themselves. And somewhere in your mind, you have probably asked the question, why does that person have no friends? Is something wrong with them? Are they just antisocial, rude, difficult? But here is what nobody is talking about. The psychology behind having no friends is one of the deepest, most misunderstood topics in all of human behavior. And once you understand it, you will never look at a person who is alone the same way again, not even yourself. Let us start at the very beginning. Humans are wired for connection. That is not a motivational quote. That is biology. Your brain has an entire system built specifically to track social bonds. It is called the social monitoring system, and it runs in the background of your mind 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is constantly scanning. Who likes me? Who does not? Am I included? Am I rejected? Am I safe in this group? This system is so ancient, so deeply embedded in your neurology, that social rejection activates the same brain regions as physical pain. Not metaphorically, literally the same regions. When you feel left out, your brain treats it like a knife wound. So now ask yourself this. What does it do to a person when that system has been activated in pain over and over again for years, sometimes for their entire life? That is where we begin to understand the person with no friends, because the story never starts with isolation. It always starts with hurt. Think about the child who tried to join the group on the playground and got laughed at. Think about the teenager who opened up to someone they trusted and got mocked for it. Think about the adult who gave everything to a friendship and watched it fall apart without explanation. Each one of those moments leaves a mark. And the mind, being the survival machine that it is, starts to do something very logical. It starts to protect itself. Psychologists call this social withdrawal as a defense mechanism, and it is one of the most common and least understood patterns in human behavior. The person is not choosing loneliness because they love it. They are choosing it because closeness once cost them something they could not afford to lose again. This is not weakness. This is adaptation. Now let us get deeper, because there are actually several distinct psychological profiles of people who have no friends, and they are wildly different from each other. Most people lump them all together. They are all just loners. But that is like saying everyone with a headache has the same problem. The causes are completely different, and understanding those causes changes everything. The first type is the deeply hurt introvert. This is someone who is naturally quiet, naturally internal. They do not hate people. They are not afraid of people. They simply recharge alone. They process the world through deep thought rather than social interaction. But somewhere along the way, the world told them that was wrong. Be more social. Why are you so quiet? You need to come out of your shell. And so they tried. They pushed against their own nature. They went to the parties. They forced the small talk. And it felt hollow every single time. Not because they were broken, but because they were pretending to be someone else. And after enough years of that, they stopped trying altogether. Not because they gave up on people, but because the version of social life being offered to them never fit who they actually were. These people often have incredibly rich inner worlds, profound thoughts, deep emotional capacity. They are not cold. They are not empty. They are simply waiting for a connection that actually feels real. And in a world that rewards surface-level interaction, that kind of person can wait a very long time. The second type is the chronically misunderstood person. This is someone who thinks differently. Maybe their humor is too dark. Maybe their interests are too niche. Maybe their way of seeing the world does not match the people around them. And every time they try to express who they actually are, they get blank stares. Or worse, they get correction. You should not think that way. That is weird. Why would you care about that? After enough of that, a very specific thing happens inside them. They stop sharing. They learn to hide the most interesting parts of themselves. And what people see on the outside becomes a filtered, smaller, safer version of who they actually are. But here is the painful irony. The version they show the world is not interesting enough to attract deep connection. And the version they are hiding is exactly what would magnetize the right people. They are trapped between authenticity and rejection, and they chose rejection of self to avoid rejection by others. The third type is the person with social anxiety. And I want to be very careful here because social anxiety is not just shyness. It is not just being nervous at parties. Social anxiety is a constant, grinding internal experience where every social interaction becomes a performance review. Before the conversation, they are rehearsing what to say. During the conversation, they are monitoring every word, every pause, every expression on the other person's face. After the conversation, they are replaying it on a loop. Did I say the wrong thing? Did they think I was boring? Did I embarrass myself? This level of mental energy expenditure makes socializing genuinely exhausting. Not socially exhausting, cognitively, emotionally, physically exhausting. And so over time, they avoid it, not because they do not want friends, but because the cost of each interaction feels impossibly high. Research shows that people with social anxiety often have extraordinary levels of empathy. They are hyper-attuned to others. They notice everything. The slight change in someone's tone, the micro-expression, the pause before the answer. They feel everything deeply. And that sensitivity, which could be their greatest gift in friendship, becomes the very thing that makes friendship feel unbearable. The fourth type is the person who was betrayed. Not once, but repeatedly. This is the person who trusted and got burned, who loved and got abandoned, who opened a door and had it slammed back in their face enough times that eventually they stopped opening doors. Psychologists have a term for what happens here. It is called betrayal trauma, and it does not just hurt, it rewires. It changes the way the brain processes trust at a fundamental level. The amygdala, which is your brain's threat detection system, starts flagging closeness itself as a threat. The very act of getting emotionally close to someone triggers an alarm. Warning, last time you did this, you got hurt. Warning, this person might leave. Warning, do not invest. And so they hold people at arm's length, not because they are cold, but because their nervous system has been trained through painful experience that closeness equals danger. They will often be warm at a surface level, friendly even. But the moment a relationship starts to deepen, something pulls them back. They create distance. They go quiet. They disappear. And people around them often interpret this as disinterest, when actually it is the opposite. The deeper the connection feels, the more frightening it becomes. The fifth type is the high achiever who outgrew their environment. This one is less talked about, but incredibly common. This is the person who grew, who changed, who expanded their thinking, their values, their ambitions, and looked around one day to realize that the people they used to call friends were no longer aligned with where they were going. Maybe they started reading more, and their old friends mocked them for it. Maybe they started building a business and their old friends felt threatened. Maybe they started prioritizing their health, their peace, their purpose, and the old social circle had no room for those things. And so slowly the old friendships faded, and new ones had not yet formed, and they found themselves in a gap, not broken, not antisocial, just between versions of themselves, and the new version had not yet found its people. This kind of aloneness is actually one of the most misunderstood because from the outside it looks like pride, like arrogance, like they think they are better than everyone. But from the inside, it is just loneliness in transition. It is the painful, necessary space between who you were and who you are becoming. Now let us talk about what living with no friends actually does to a person psychologically over time, because this is important. This is where the real depth lives. Research from the field of social neuroscience is very clear. Chronic loneliness does not just feel bad. It restructures the brain. It changes how you perceive the world. Studies conducted at the University of Chicago found that lonely people develop what researchers call hypervigilance to social threat. Their brains literally start scanning for danger in social situations with higher sensitivity than non-lonely people. They become quicker to interpret ambiguous cues as hostile. A neutral face reads as unfriendly. A delayed text response reads as rejection. A group of people laughing nearby reads as laughing at them. This is not paranoia. It is not a character flaw. It is the nervous system adapting to a world that has repeatedly felt socially unsafe. And here is the tragic loop that creates. The hypervigilance makes them act in ways that push people away. They come across as too guarded, too defensive, too difficult to read, and that behavior creates more rejection, which confirms the belief that people cannot be trusted, which deepens the isolation, which increases the hypervigilance. Around and around they go, not because they are broken, but because the system designed to protect them is running on outdated, painful data. There is something else that happens too. When a person is chronically isolated, their internal narrative becomes their only narrative. They have no one to check their thinking against, no one to say, hey, you are being too hard on yourself, no one to offer a different perspective. And so the stories they tell themselves go unchallenged. The belief that they are unlikable becomes fact in their mind. The belief that they are different in a bad way becomes fact. The belief that closeness always ends in pain becomes fact. Not because those things are true, but because no one is close enough to offer them a different story. Psychologists call this cognitive distortion, and it is one of the most painful side effects of long-term isolation. The mind, left alone with its own fears, eventually starts to treat the fears as truth. But here is something that never gets said. Something important. Many of the most fascinating, most intelligent, most emotionally complex people in history had no friends. Not because they were broken, but because the depth of who they were required a kind of connection that most of the world was not capable of offering. Nikola Tesla died virtually alone. Emily Dickinson spent decades in near total isolation. Isaac Newton was famously incapable of maintaining friendships. Franz Kafka, H.P. Lovecraft, Glenn Gould. These were not failed human beings. They were people whose inner worlds were so rich, so consuming, so vast, that ordinary social life felt small by comparison. I am not saying isolation is healthy. I am saying that the assumption that a person with no friends is somehow less than is one of the most culturally ingrained and least examined prejudices we carry. Now let us talk about something even more specific. The internal experience of being a person with no friends in a world that treats friendship as proof of worth. Because in modern culture, especially with social media, friendship has become a status symbol. Your worth is measured by your follower count. Your happiness is measured by how many people showed up to your birthday. Your success is measured by how often your phone buzzes. And into this world walks a person who is alone. And every message the culture sends them says the same thing. You are failing at being human. They scroll through Instagram and see groups of laughing friends at dinners they were not invited to. They watch movies where the lonely person is always the villain or the punchline. They hear people casually say things like, who does not have friends, and mean it as an insult. And every single one of those moments reinforces the internal message that their loneliness is a verdict, that they are fundamentally less than. What that does to self-worth is devastating. Over time, many people with no friends develop what psychologists call a core belief of unlovability. Not a thought, a belief. A deep, structural, foundational assumption about themselves that feels as real as any fact. I am the kind of person who does not get loved. I am the kind of person who does not get chosen. I am the kind of person who is tolerated but not truly wanted. And operating from that core belief shapes everything. How they hold their body, how they enter a room, how they respond when someone tries to get close, how they interpret kindness, whether they trust it or wait for it to be taken away. This is not self-pity. This is the psychology of accumulated social pain, and it deserves to be understood, not dismissed. Now here is where I want to shift the conversation, because everything I have said so far is about why people end up alone, but I want to talk about what actually happens inside that aloneness, because it is not all darkness. There is something else there too. When a person spends significant time alone, they develop something that most socially connected people never do. They develop an interior life. A genuine, deep-textured relationship with their own mind. They think, they observe, they reflect, they sit with questions that most people never have time for because they are always surrounded by noise and others. They ask the big questions. Who am I really? What do I actually want? What do I believe when no one is watching? What matters to me when I am not performing for anyone? And some of them, not all, but some, arrive at answers that are genuinely extraordinary. They develop a sense of self that is not constructed for external approval. It is built in solitude. And that kind of self-knowledge is rare, genuinely rare. Most people only ever know themselves in relation to others. Who am I to my friends? Who am I to my family? Who am I to my colleagues? But the person who has been alone for a long time knows something different. They know who they are when no one is watching. And that is a different and deeper kind of knowledge. There is a concept in psychology called individuation, developed by Carl Jung. It is the process of becoming fully, authentically yourself, of integrating all the parts of who you are, including the shadow, the parts you would rather not look at. Jung believed that most people never complete this process because they are too caught up in the collective, in the group, in the social identity. The person who is alone, who has no choice but to sit with themselves, often goes further in this process than people who are constantly surrounded. Not always, but often. This does not make loneliness desirable, but it does make it meaningful. let us talk about something that I think is the most important psychological truth about people with no friends. And it is this: most of them do not want to be alone. I know that sounds obvious, but it needs to be said clearly. Because there is a cultural narrative that says loners are loners by choice, that they prefer it, that they like to be alone. And sometimes that is true. But far more often, the person who is alone is carrying a specific kind of grief. The grief of wanting connection and not knowing how to reach it. The grief of having tried and been hurt. The grief of feeling like they exist just slightly out of reach of the warmth they see everyone else sharing. It is one of the quietest kinds of suffering because it has no visible wound. No one can see it. It does not have a name that people recognize, but it shapes everything. And because it has no name, it often goes unaddressed. The person does not tell anyone because there is no one to tell. They carry it alone, in the silence of their apartment, in the particular quality of a Sunday afternoon when everyone else seems to be somewhere, with someone, doing something that matters, and they are sitting with the weight of their own company, wondering what it is about them that makes connection so hard. That moment, that specific, quiet, devastating moment, is one of the most common human experiences, and yet it is one of the least spoken about. Let us talk about what research says about what people with no friends actually need, not what they are told they need, not the cultural prescription of just put yourself out there, but what the psychology actually shows. The first thing is not quantity, it is quality. Study after study shows that one genuine connection is more protective for mental health than dozens of surface-level ones. The person with no friends does not necessarily need to become socially popular. They need one person who actually sees them. One relationship where the armor can come off. One space where they do not have to perform or manage or carefully edit themselves. Just one. The second thing is safety. Not just physical safety, psychological safety. The feeling that if they say something real, something honest, something that reveals who they actually are, they will not be punished for it, mocked, abandoned, misunderstood. For someone who has been hurt in connection, this kind of safety is incredibly hard to find and incredibly necessary, because without it, genuine closeness is not possible, no matter how much they want it. The third thing is time. Real connection for people who have been burned is slow, slower than most people expect. Most people get impatient with someone who seems guarded, who does not open up quickly, who keeps a distance, and so they move on, and the person is left once again confirmed in their belief that people leave. But if someone stays, if someone is patient enough to allow the trust to build slowly, what emerges on the other side of that patience is often one of the most loyal, most thoughtful, most deeply committed friendships a person can experience. Because when someone who has learned not to trust finally decides to trust, they mean it completely. Now I want to speak directly to anyone watching this who recognizes themselves in what I have been describing. If you have spent years feeling like something is wrong with you because you do not have friends, if you have looked at your life and felt that particular shame of loneliness, if you have convinced yourself that you are too broken, too different, too difficult to be loved, I want you to hear this. Your aloneness is not a verdict on your worth. It is a story about your pain, and pain can change, not through willpower, not through forcing yourself into social situations that feel wrong, but through the slow, careful, deliberate work of understanding yourself, of identifying the wounds that taught you that closeness is dangerous, of finding even one space where you can begin to take the armor off. You are not too much. You are not too little. You are not unworthy of connection. You are someone who learned to survive in a way that costs you connection. And that survival strategy, as painful as it is, made sense given what you went through. The question is not what is wrong with you. The question is what happened to you. And when you start answering that question honestly, everything begins to shift. There is one more thing I want to address before we close. And it is the question that sits underneath all of this. Can a person with no friends be happy? The honest psychological answer is complicated, because happiness is not the same as hedonic pleasure, the moment-to-moment feeling of enjoyment. And it is not the same as eudaimonia, the deeper sense of flourishing and meaning. Someone who is alone can absolutely experience pleasure, joy even, in solitude, in work, in art, in nature, in the endless landscape of their own inner world. But genuine flourishing, the kind that research consistently links to long-term well-being, does require connection, not a crowd, not a social calendar, but real, genuine, seen connection, at minimum, with one other human being. The person who has no friends and who has made peace with that, who has found meaning in solitude, who has built a rich life around their own inner world, is doing something real and valid and worthwhile. But there is almost always, beneath that peace, a door they have not quite closed, a part of them that still wonders what it would feel like to be truly known, truly seen, truly chosen. And that part, that small, persistent wondering, is not weakness, it is humanity. It is the same biological drive that has kept our species alive for hundreds of thousands of years. The drive to belong, the drive to matter to someone, the drive to be, for at least one other person in this vast and noisy world, irreplaceable. If you are someone without friends, do not let the world tell you that makes you less. You are carrying something heavy that most people will never understand. But carrying something heavy does not mean you are broken. It means you are strong enough to carry it. And strength like that, if it ever finds a safe place to set the weight down, has the capacity for a depth of connection that most people, with their easy, uncomplicated social lives, will never actually experience. Because the people who have known real loneliness know something about connection that the never lonely never will. They know what it is worth. They know its true value. They know with every cell in their body that it is not something to take for granted, and when they finally find it, they hold it like something sacred, because to them, it is. That is the psychology of people with no friends. Not a diagnosis, not a flaw, a story, a human, complicated, painful, and sometimes quietly beautiful story about what happens when a person moves through life without the thing all of us were built to need, and what they become in the long, silent space of learning to live without it.